Badr, let me bring you in at this point. The UAE, of course, is set to host COP28 in Dubai at the end of the year. The country has faced a lot of criticism and, frankly, an awful lot of skepticism about its motives for wanting to host this event, given that it is a major oil producer. You, like many, straddle the sort of two worlds of fossil fuels and green energy. Can these two be climate bedfellows?
So it's important to set out some context here. COP28 in the UAE comes over 30 years since the UN's Convention on Climate Change was adopted. And what's happened since? Well, despite many lofty announcements, global emissions have gone up 50%. But so is the world's population by almost the same amount. And by the middle of the century, we expect that the world's population to hit almost 10 billion, with almost all of the additional middle class likely to be from Asia and Africa. The world economy will also double again in GDP terms, and 6 of the 7 largest economies in the world will be from emerging economies led by China and India. Now, is this a concern for climate change? Yes, of course it is, but we can no longer decouple the human development agenda, which from memory is 12 of the 17 SDGs, from the climate agenda, or the nature agenda for that matter. They're two sides of the same coin, and the edge of that coin is conducive climate policy that embraces a greener evolution of all of our systems, whilst ensuring equitable opportunities for the 6.5 billion people across the developing nations of the world who haven't yet been afforded these opportunities. Now, I could sit here and complain about the hypocrisy coming from political elites and activists in nations with 24-hour electricity, who so far contributed the vast majority of cumulative emissions to fuel their own economic and social prosperity. I could sit here and moan about double standards with energy policies, with many European nations today openly questioning their own net zero pledges, reopening and extending subsidies to dirty coal plants and scrambling to extract gas from Africa and the Middle East, whilst preaching that the global South needs to fully rely on alternatives. I could also sit here and point fingers at the constant failures of many rich nations to abide by their climate finance pledges, with only a fraction of the 100 billion per year being honored as droughts and rising sea levels and heat waves, many of the poorest nations. But I'm not going to do that, Becky, because we need to stop pointing figures, and we need to stop this reductionist thinking and to focus on inclusive funding and delivery mechanisms that compound our strengths, our collective strengths, to deliver on our climate and nature goals. And the UAE really is an ideal place for this inclusive co-creating of solutions. The UAE is a great example of a country that in just 2 generations rapidly diversified its economy, with over 70% GDP to date coming from outside the oil and gas sector. The country's green agenda, which was launched well over 10 years ago, and its net zero by 2050 strategy, clearly laying out an implementation plan that embraces green tech to further transform our economies towards net zero and nature positive, whilst of course generating even more opportunities, not just for those living in the UAE, but really for the wider region. And initiatives like, or companies like, I should say, Masdar, are active in more than 50 countries, I believe, and invested or committed investments to projects worth more than $50 billion, with many multiples of that to come. Don't forget, Abu Dhabi and Dubai have 2 of the top 10 solar parks in the world, with, I think, the world's cheapest electricity today, solar-generated electricity in the UAE. And finally, with unquestioned credentials in hosting major international events. I mean, recent Expo 2020, which you were at, Becky, hosting more than 25 million people from across the world, with over, I think, 190 country pavilions, making it by far the most inclusive history. So on the human dimension, the UAE is, of course, home to an incredibly diverse population, home to 200 nationalities, with freedoms afforded to all religions and faiths. I think, and don't forget, of course, 1/3 of the world living within a 4-hour flight of the UAE. So again, with the UAE being, I think, the gateway for emerging economies, particularly from Asia and Africa, COP28 is an unparalleled opportunity to showcase the Global South's transformative journey and build inclusive partnerships to drive action towards a greener and more sustainable future. Now, one final thing just to add, because you mentioned COP28's president-designate, Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, I think in many ways he epitomizes this opportunity, having served as the UAE's climate envoy for 10 years, as founder CEO of one of the largest renewable energy platforms in the world, as Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology, helping to nurture and scale green tech from the UAE to the world, and more recently leading the massive decarbonization efforts of our national oil company. So in many respects, I think Dr. Sultan has the potential to be the Renaissance man of climate.
Thank you.